Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide divorce, mediation, and valuation services in St. Louis, Missouri. Today, we will actually discuss environmental, social, and governance policies, or ESG policies, and its effect on valuations with Mark Zyla. Mark Zyla is a valuation expert in Georgia, and he's the managing director of Zyla Valuation Advisors, an Atlanta valuation and litigation consulting firm. He's also the chairman of the Standards Review Board for the International Valuation Standards Council. He was also one of the primary authors of the education program that the AICPA and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors for the credential, which is certified in Entity and Intangible Assets, or the CEIV, which basically certifies valuation professionals in the valuation for financial reporting purposes. We don't have the proper benchmarks. So if now all of a sudden you've hired an executive, right, for diversity, and you have, or even an owner, you now have sort of a different cost structure that if you looked at and compared to other people, be like, oh, we're 10% or 5% more in our salaries and our wages, when the reality is you might not be completely, like that might be the normal going forward. So what are some of the challenges of how we actually measure this impact of these policies on value? And do we even have benchmarking or anything out there yet to kind of help with that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The trend in a lot of ways, even though it's been 10, 15 years, in some cases, is still in its infancy. So it's occurring quickly. The economic impacts of the pandemic have accelerated this trend. However, the biggest challenges, which you just hit on, is standardization of measurement. First of all, if you think about measuring ESG and how it relates to valuation, there's three parts. One is measuring the impact of these policies themselves. And there are rating agencies that rate various environmental, social, and governance policies of companies and provide benchmarks for that. However, the challenge with that first is when you compare, say, a rating agency for like corporate bonds, so like a Moody's or a Fitch or a Standard & Poor's, generally they come to very similar conclusions. So there's a lot of correlation between those agencies in rating debt and risk. When you have the rating agencies for ESG, at least currently, these agencies have different focus, so they're not nearly as correlated. And so there are some challenges, first of all, just measuring impact of ESG. The second challenge is, how is that disclosed? And right now, the accounting profession is becoming more heavily involved in disclosures and financial reporting of ESG, which is great news for valuation experts. However, they're not there yet. So, but some examples, some very positive examples, is the IFRS, the International Financial Reporting System, from the International Accounting Standards Board, is developing an international sustainability standards board. That would be a sister board to the organization that issues accounting standards. So they're going to set up reporting standards for ESG or sustainability measures so that there's consistency across financial reporting for these type of issues. So that's the good news. The International Organization of Securities Regulators, IOSCO, has endorsed this process, and they're actively focused on these kind of standards. So, but more reporting, better reporting of sustainability efforts by corporations, and having consistency and reliability across companies. So that's good news for valuation experts. Now, the issue for valuation for us as a profession is, okay, once we have all this information in place, assume that we start getting better information, is how do we utilize that information? How does it impact valuation? So I think once we start getting better reporting, better disclosures, we can assimilate it in basic framework of valuation that currently exists. Okay. So it's not going to change how we do the work, but it's going to change the inputs and things like questions that we ask, and making sure we're comfortable with the efforts and how it's going to impact eventually on the inputs to our valuations.
But realistically, I think what you said was two pieces, and we've just talked about the one piece, but there is an implication for cash flow. And we've kind of talked about that. And that seems logical. You know, we have to invest in these areas to be better. And there are places that even our consumers didn't put heavy importance on. And now everybody's, you know, I mean, single-use plastics, for example, you know, like it's always been an issue of we use too much plastic, but now it's more of a focus of like, okay, how can we remove that? Well, you have more people actually buying cups that they can reuse, right? Well, it takes us to be involved in it. But I think the piece that maybe we didn't talk about that you also said was that this has an implication for risk. And yes. I think that's the harder one. And realistically, even if you have bodies that are putting together benchmarking, you know, this comes kind of in with company specific risk premium, right? That you're going to have your own sort of internal somewhat consistent measurement of how that impacts risk, because you're going to see a bunch of different valuations, you know, like instead of going and saying, oh, well, it should make you 2% less risky. It's really going to be like, totally, how much do I see that this impacts the risk from a bigger? Do you want to talk about any of that?
Yeah, no, those are excellent points. One example, as far as cost of capital, one issue is, or an example of the impact of this is, Morningstar did a study and looked at funds that had a sustainability or an ESG focused, and compared rates of return on those funds compared to peer groups that didn't have that particular focus. And they found in some cases the rates of return may be 20% higher for the socially responsible funds. So there could be a lot of different reasons for that. Could be people want to invest in those funds, it's attracting more capital. It could be that investors are aware of the risk of not implementing these policies, so they're looking at those companies as riskier. But there are there's empirical evidence of rates of return for social responsibility. And to your point, that in more practical use for valuation specialists is things like how we develop our cost of capital. It may not be just company-specific risk, but it may be things like beta. So, for example, if we're using guideline companies to develop beta, if all the guideline companies have strong social policies in place, and we think in general that their risk is less, their rates of return may be higher. If we're using it to develop a cost of capital for a company that doesn't have a strong policy, how do we make adjustments for that? Things like that. So it just increases, and it's part of the normal stuff we should be doing anyway. But it's just a different set of questions or different issues that we as valuation specialists need to think about.
Well, and you've said before that this was something that you were pretty passionate about, and it could be, and like you said, it's not like, 10, 15 years, people have said that some sort of social and environmental kind of investment is a good process. But, the valuation expert needs to be aware, like that is a perfect example of guideline company. Like I think as it continues to be important to even know that there have been studies done that said that these are more profitable, like that is very helpful information, but also then determining how you apply it.